In the cool mist of dawn, horse-drawn buggies clip along gravel roads while wood stoves crackle to life in homes without electricity. Here, in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, heart disease seems to follow a different rulebook. Among the Old-Order Amish, one of the most insular and tradition-bound communities in North America, rates of cardiovascular events are curiously low. In a nation where heart disease remains the leading cause of death, this rural anomaly has quietly drawn the attention of curious outsiders. Cardiologists, metabolic researchers, and public health analysts alike. What they find is not a miracle pill or superfood, but something far more elusive, an ecosystem of health woven into the fabric of everyday life. There are no gyms in Amish country, no smartphones nudging you to stand. Yet Amish men average over 18,000 steps a day, most of it through purposeful labor, tilling fields, raising barns, hauling firewood. Women, even while managing children and cooking from scratch, clock an average of 14,000 steps daily. These numbers, gleaned from studies where Amish volunteers agreed, albeit reluctantly, to wear pedometers, dwarf those of the average American adult, who struggles to reach even 5,000. This relentless movement isn't part of a fitness trend. It's survival. The Amish way of life demands constant, low-intensity motion from sunrise to sunset. Still, physical activity alone doesn't explain the full picture. Their diet is another paradox. Rich in saturated fats, whole milk, eggs, and carbohydrates, bread, potatoes, and sugar-sweetened preserves, Amish meals would trigger alarm in most cardiology clinics. Yet blood pressure, triglycerides, and inflammatory markers among many Amish fall into normal or even optimal ranges. It's a contradiction that frustrates conventional wisdom, and one that leads researchers deeper into the community, searching not just for what the Amish do, but what they don't. In whispered conversations and handwritten survey forms, one peculiar absence begins to stand out. A fruit, celebrated in mainstream dietary guidelines and ubiquitous in supermarkets, is conspicuously rare in Amish kitchens. It's not forbidden, simply avoided, perhaps by cultural memory or ancestral instinct. And though it may seem trivial, this absence starts to point towards something bigger, something that might help explain not just the heart health of this community, but the metabolic unraveling of the modern world. Why would a fruit so common elsewhere be missing here? And what could its absence reveal about the Amish heart advantage? The next step in the investigation would bring scientists into kitchens, gardens, and even seed catalogs, searching for clues in what was never planted. The deeper researchers ventured into Amish homes and kitchens, the clearer the contrast became. Shelves lined with preserved apples, pears, cherries, and even rhubarb. Fruits either grown in backyard orchards or traded at local farm stands, spoke to a diet grounded in the seasonal cycle. But one fruit, ever present in American pantries, vending machines, and juice boxes, was conspicuously missing: the banana. There were no bunches hanging on hooks, no brown speckled peels tossed into compost bins, and not a single mention in handwritten family recipes spanning generations. In its place were native fruits, tart currants, black raspberries, Concord grapes, grown in soil the families had worked for centuries. The banana, so common it seems almost unremarkable, had simply never taken root here. And in that gap, a theory began to form. Bananas are a modern agricultural marvel, engineered for sweetness, shipped thousands of miles, and consumed by millions every day. But nutritionally, the contemporary banana is a far cry from its wilder ancestors. Its high glycemic load delivers a rapid sugar spike, and when paired with a sedentary lifestyle, that surge can tip insulin resistance into motion. For individuals already at risk, whether due to genetics, stress, or poor diet, the frequent consumption of bananas may contribute, however subtly, to the slow creep of metabolic syndrome. This isn't to say bananas are dangerous in isolation, but in a world increasingly defined by processed food, minimal movement, and chronic stress, Even natural sugars can become metabolic accelerants. The Amish, by sheer accident of tradition and climate, had eliminated this variable. Without electricity, refrigeration, or year-round supermarkets, bananas simply didn't fit. They ripen too quickly, spoil too easily, and don't grow in the temperate fields of Pennsylvania. But beyond logistics, there was also cultural inertia. Amish dietary habits are rooted in agrarian practicality and ancestral continuity. If it can't be grown, preserved, or traded locally, it holds little value. Over decades, this unspoken code filtered out many modern imports: soda, fast food, energy drinks, and yes, bananas. What emerged instead was a food environment that, though rich in fats and sugars, was governed by rhythm, season, and scarcity. And that rhythm matters. Amish meals are taken at consistent times. There's no grazing or snacking between chores. Portions are large, but meals are deliberate, prepared from scratch, eaten communally, and followed by hours of physical labor. Even their treats, pies, dumplings, jams, are usually offset by manual work that keeps glucose levels from lingering too long in the bloodstream. In this context, a banana isn't just another fruit. It's a modern anomaly, fast, convenient, hyper-palatable, and increasingly divorced from physical effort. When scientists introduced bananas into a small test group of Amish adults, as part of a controlled dietary study, they watched with careful eyes. Blood samples taken before and after meals showed only mild glucose fluctuations in most participants, thanks to their overall metabolic fitness. But one trend emerged. Among those who had recently reduced their physical workload, due to age, injury, or changes in farm operations, the post-banana glucose response was more pronounced. For these individuals, even modest insulin spikes hinted at early resistance. It wasn't conclusive, but it was telling. The real lesson was dawning. The Amish heart advantage wasn't rooted in a single gene or banned food. It came from a convergence of diet, movement, rhythm, and tradition. But what happened when one element, like physical activity, began to fade? The balance shifted. The system, once resilient, began to crack. And that's where the story turns. Not toward what the Amish avoid, but what the modern world has forgotten. At the heart of every Amish homestead is a rhythm, slow, deliberate, and synchronized with the seasons. Breakfast is served just after dawn, often beginning with a prayer, and it anchors the day. Eggs collected that morning, fried in butter from the family's own churn. Thick slices of homemade bread toasted over a wood stove. Preserves crafted last summer sealed in mason jars. The food is hearty, dense with calories, but never mindless. There are no protein bars or grab-and-go snacks. Every bite requires effort: planting, harvesting, canning, or cooking. And this full-circle engagement with food appears to echo through the body's internal chemistry. Researchers who embedded with Amish families noticed not just what was eaten, but how. Meals were slow, communal, and limited to 3 a day. Children helped serve. Elders led grace. No one brought food to their work or ate alone in silence. This structured pattern stood in stark contrast to the modern grazing culture, where bites between meetings, sugary drinks in cars, and late-night snacking are routine. Even the Amish desserts, shoofly pie, molasses cookies, fruit dumplings, were part of meals, not deviations from them. When food becomes ritual, not reflex, the metabolic load shifts accordingly. And so the banana became a kind of symbol of modernity's creeping convenience. In urban America, bananas are ubiquitous. Office bowls overflow with them. Parents pack them in lunchboxes. Athletes praise them for fast-digesting energy. But when studied through the lens of insulin response in sedentary populations, this fruit, especially when paired with other carbs, can contribute to postprandial blood sugar spikes. This becomes more pronounced when metabolic flexibility, how well the body switches between burning carbs and fat, is compromised. The Amish, by contrast, exhibit exceptional metabolic flexibility, a product of relentless physical labor and infrequent snacking. In their context, even high-carb foods are efficiently managed. But what about Amish individuals who leave the fold? Some do, drawn by jobs, education, or personal calling. Those who transition to English life often abandon manual labor and adopt typical Western diets. When health data from these individuals was compared to their kin still on the farm, the results were sobering. Higher rates of obesity, hypertension, and prediabetes began to appear within just a few years. The same genes, the same family trees, only the lifestyle changed. And among the most consistent dietary shifts, the sudden introduction of processed snacks and store-bought fruit, bananas among them. This contrast underscored a hard truth. It wasn't the banana per se. It was the world that made the banana easy, constant, and contextless. In the Amish ecosystem, food is earned, movement is constant, and metabolism is buffered by physicality. Outside of it, food is abundant and movement rare, tilting the scales toward disease. What Amish living inadvertently revealed was the price of disconnection. Disconnection from labor, from food sources, from bodily rhythm. And so, the question no longer centered on a single fruit's danger. It widened into something more pressing. How can a society so far removed from its agrarian roots reclaim the metabolic guardrails that once kept disease at bay? As researchers shifted focus from diet alone to the choreography of life itself, they would uncover deeper mechanisms, some biological, others behavioral, that challenged everything we thought we knew about nutrition and heart health. It was in the fertile fields of Pennsylvania's Dutch country that the contrast between tradition and modernity became undeniable. In one barn-turned laboratory just outside Intercourse, Pennsylvania, researchers from a university cardiovascular institute set up a long-term study, quietly enrolling Amish volunteers. Their mission was simple: track metabolic markers over months and years, and see what patterns emerged, not just from food, but from everything that framed the Amish day. What they found wasn't a singular nutrient or food group to blame or praise. It was synergy. It was structure. It was the invisible scaffolding of life. One of the earliest anomalies appeared in the triglyceride panels. Despite their high intake of saturated fat, especially from dairy, many Amish individuals had unexpectedly low triglyceride levels, sometimes below 75 milligrams per deciliter, compared to a U.S. average hovering near 150. Triglycerides, often driven by excess sugar and sedentary habits, seemed unusually stable here. The team began to suspect that the answer wasn't just in what was eaten, but how the entire metabolic engine was fueled and cooled throughout the day. Physical labor after meals seemed to act as a postprandial shock absorber. Chopping wood, walking to the barn, shoveling manure. These weren't just chores, they were insulin-regulating tools. That metabolic resilience began to show cracks when tested against controlled disruptions. In a separate study arm, a few Amish participants agreed to modify one aspect of their routine. Some reduced physical activity. Others added small servings of outside foods, including store-bought white bread, snack cakes, and yes, bananas. The change was subtle but measurable. Within just 2 weeks, fasting glucose levels crept up. A1C, the long-term blood sugar marker, shifted slightly in the wrong direction. Even mood and sleep quality reported minor declines. The experiment wasn't meant to demonize the foods, but to underscore the fragility of the Amish health advantage when pulled out of its natural context. Amish elders, when interviewed, rarely spoke about health in the way outsiders did. There was no talk of cholesterol numbers or antioxidant levels. Instead, they spoke of balance, between work and rest, between hunger and fullness, between seasons of plenty and seasons of lean. One bishop explained that food was never meant to be constant. It was meant to be earned, shared, preserved. And in that worldview, a banana, ever-present, unseasonal, soft and sweet, felt not just foreign, but indulgent. Not sinful, but suspicious. Even without a scientific vocabulary, they understood something crucial. Metabolic health is not a moment, but a pattern. And that pattern is breaking elsewhere. In the outside world, heart disease continues its quiet rampage. Nearly 700,000 Americans die from it each year, often after decades of dietary drift, chronic inflammation, and sedentary decline. Fast food, sugary beverages, and ultra-processed meals draw the most scrutiny. But even natural foods, when divorced from movement and rhythm, can lose their innocence. The banana became the case study not because it's harmful in itself, but because it symbolizes our modern tendency to isolate, overconsume, and overlook context. Back in the lab, the researchers shifted focus. Instead of isolating foods, they began mapping patterns. Timing of meals, distance walked daily, total hours of sleep, types of labor performed post-meal. They built metabolic maps, showing how Amish bodies processed fats and sugars differently, and how even modest effort after eating, a brisk walk, a chore, lowered glucose curves dramatically. This wasn't magic. It was momentum built into life. And so the question that first drove their study, was there a dangerous fruit avoided by the Amish, had evolved into something more nuanced. Yes, there were foods they didn't eat, but the real insight was in what they did every day, without fanfare or fitness trackers, to make their diets work. The danger, it turned out, wasn't in the fruit. It was in our disconnection from everything that once gave food its place. It wasn't long before the quiet hum of research in Amish country began to echo beyond the fields. At a medical symposium on non-communicable diseases in Baltimore, one study stood out, a slide showing two glucose curves, one from a typical urban American consuming a banana with breakfast, the other from an Amish man eating molasses-sweetened cornmeal mush, prompted a flurry of whispered commentary. The urban subject's glucose spiked and lingered high for hours. The Amish curve rose modestly, then returned to baseline within 90 minutes. No medication, no dietary restriction, just a morning of barn chores. The audience, largely composed of urban physicians and researchers, was unsettled. The Amish subject's breakfast contained more sugar and fat, yet his metabolic response was far healthier. The difference wasn't food. It was movement, insulin sensitivity, and possibly something deeper. Mitochondrial efficiency honed by a life of physical strain and rest. It forced a hard reassessment. The conventional nutrition guidelines, centered on calories and portion control, missed the broader framework. Rhythms of energy expenditure, circadian cues, and food's relationship with effort. Back in the community, Amish volunteers remained humble about their role in the growing national conversation. Most had never seen the graphs produced from their blood work. They returned to their chores, church gatherings, and barn raisings, unaware that their daily lives were quietly challenging mainstream medicine. Yet, beneath the simplicity, subtle adaptations were underway. With each generation, pressure from the outside world seeps in. Some younger Amish now work in English-owned factories, where sitting replaces plowing. Others use propane refrigerators, allowing new types of store-bought foods, bananas among them, to trickle in. These changes, though small, carry outsized effects. One elder noted that his grandson had begun eating bananas with peanut butter each morning, a practice adopted from a local non-Amish friend. It seemed harmless enough, but within months, the boy had gained visible weight and showed unusual lethargy after meals. His grandmother, unable to name the problem in medical terms, simply said, "His fire's gone out." That intuitive phrasing captured what the researchers had begun to quantify. Declines in metabolic vigor tied not to a single food, but to the slow erosion of lifestyle scaffolding. Meanwhile, outside the community, interest surged. Articles dubbed the Amish metabolic unicorns, and wellness influencers began co-opting their habits, sans the hard labor. New diets emerged promising Amish-style health. Raw butter, sourdough bread, preserved fruits. But these imitations missed the core principle. The Amish health model wasn't about individual foods. It was about system integrity. A closed loop where food production, preparation, consumption, and expenditure were all linked. Remove one piece, and the loop frays. And so, what began as a search for a dangerous fruit became a cautionary tale about context collapse. A banana, when eaten by a sedentary adult surrounded by processed snacks and sleep deprivation, may nudge the body toward dysfunction. That same banana, consumed in the middle of a day spent planting, lifting, and walking, is merely fuel. The danger wasn't in the fruit. It was in the world we've built around it. The next phase of the study would go further. Researchers would examine not just daily routines, but the internal clocks, circadian rhythms, that governed everything from digestion to hormone release. And once again, the Amish, without modern science, seemed to be in sync with something medicine was only beginning to understand. Long before the term circadian rhythm became a fixture in health podcasts and sleep clinics, the Amish had aligned their lives to the unbending pulse of natural light. No artificial illumination, no backlit screens. Just dawn and dusk as the bookends of daily effort. This adherence to solar cycles, accidental or not, played a critical role in the quiet protection of their cardiovascular systems. As researchers dove deeper, they began to connect the dots between light exposure, meal timing, hormonal cycles, and the unseen machinery of heart health. What emerged wasn't just a contrast to modern living. It was a blueprint. Cortisol, insulin, and melatonin, three of the body's most influential hormonal regulators, rise and fall in predictable arcs across a 24-hour cycle. Disrupt these arcs, as shift workers and screen-glued night owls often do, and the consequences stack up. Insulin resistance, higher blood pressure, systemic inflammation. Yet in the Amish world, where bedtime follows sunset and mornings begin with livestock, those hormonal rhythms remain intact. Meals occur within a narrow daylight window, rarely after 6 p.m. That tight feeding window naturally mimics what scientists now call time-restricted eating, a practice shown to improve glucose control, reduce oxidative stress, and support cardiovascular health. In contrast, the modern feeding cycle is chaotic. Coffee and toast at 7 a.m., a banana or granola bar at 10, lunch at a desk, snacks on the commute, and a heavy dinner at 9 p.m. Each eating event resets the insulin clock, pushing the pancreas into overdrive and the body into a near-constant anabolic state. Over time, that leads to fat storage, vascular stress, and eventually cardiac strain. The Amish, by simply aligning food with daylight, sidestepped this silent assault. One participant in the study even chuckled when asked about late-night snacks. "Why would I eat in the dark?" he said, genuinely puzzled. But the research team wasn't just interested in when they ate. It was how their bodies recovered from eating that truly stood out. Post-meal physical activity, even light, proved decisive. Instead of returning to a chair or couch after meals, Amish men often walked back to the field. Women resumed cleaning, sewing, or tending to animals. This low-level motion, never intense but always present, acted as a metabolic sweep, clearing glucose from the bloodstream, improving vascular flexibility, and keeping postprandial triglyceride surges in check. To test this, researchers equipped a group of Amish volunteers with continuous glucose monitors, CGMs. The devices, small and discreet, tracked blood sugar minute by minute. The results were striking, even after carbohydrate-rich meals, such as mashed potatoes, rolls, and pie. The spikes were blunted. Levels rose moderately, then dropped quickly, often within an hour. In modern sedentary controls, similar meals triggered higher, more prolonged spikes. And in those spikes lay the seeds of arterial damage. Back in the lab, Another pattern emerged: nighttime heart rate variability, HRV. A measure of how well the nervous system balances stress and recovery, was consistently higher among the Amish. A high HRV is associated with reduced cardiac risk, better sleep, and lower systemic inflammation. Why? Researchers suspected that their screen-free evenings, natural sleep onset, and absence of late-night light exposure helped maintain vagal tone, the body's natural brake on cardiovascular stress. Essentially, the Amish were not just metabolically efficient, they were biologically rested. As data piled up, the case became undeniable. Amish heart protection wasn't due to any miracle diet or missing fruit. It was a full-spectrum system: sunlight, effort, rhythm, and rest, woven through centuries of rural life. But the more clearly the system was mapped, the more fragile it seemed when transplanted. Could any of this be replicated outside the context of Amish life? Or was the real danger not in any one food, but in a society that expects health while stripping away its scaffolding? Next, the focus would shift to a single gene mutation found in a small subset of the Amish, a rare quirk of DNA that seemed to confer remarkable protection from heart disease. But even here, the story would resist simplicity. For while genes might offer clues, it was behavior that brought them to life. Beneath the straw hats and calico dresses, a quieter inheritance pulses through Amish bloodlines, one invisible to the eye but potent in its protection. The APOC3 gene mutation, discovered almost by accident during routine cholesterol screenings in Lancaster County, offers a rare glimpse into how a single thread of DNA can ripple outward into whole-body resilience. Researchers who initially came to observe behavior and diet soon found themselves holding a genetic key that might one day change how heart disease is treated globally. APOC3 is short for apolipoprotein C3, a small protein that plays a large role in regulating triglyceride metabolism. In most people, APOC3 slows the breakdown of triglycerides in the blood, effectively keeping fat particles circulating longer than necessary. But in a small subset of Amish individuals, around 5%, a genetic mutation silences this function. The result is a natural suppression of triglyceride levels, improved lipid clearance, and a dramatic reduction in atherosclerosis risk. When compared to their non-mutated peers, these carriers show as much as a 40% lower incidence of coronary artery calcification, even when their diets are identical. At first, this discovery was met with excitement and commercial interest. Pharmaceutical companies quickly saw the potential in mimicking this effect through synthetic inhibitors. Clinical trials began, aiming to replicate the gene's benefit in the broader population. If a pill could lower triglycerides by turning off APOC3, maybe it could offer protection without lifestyle change. But even in the promising early phases, one fact remained stubborn: the gene alone didn't tell the whole story. Among Amish carriers of the mutation who had moved away from the community into more sedentary, modernized lives, the protective effects appeared diminished. Their triglyceride levels were still lower than average, but their overall cardiovascular risk began to mirror that of the general public. They gained weight more easily, developed early signs of insulin resistance, and showed higher blood pressure. The mutation, powerful as it was, could not override the effects of chronic inactivity and environmental mismatch. Like a high-performance engine, it needed the right fuel and maintenance to shine. This finding reinforced what many in the field already suspected. Genes may load the gun, but environment pulls the trigger. The Amish, with their relentless physical labor, clean sleep-wake cycles, and absence of processed food, had unknowingly created the ideal conditions for this rare gene to flourish. But strip away the context, and the mutation's advantages begin to fade. For researchers, it was both thrilling and sobering. A single protein tweak could shift lipid chemistry so profoundly, but not enough to rescue the body from lifestyle degradation. some scientists returned to the community with more nuanced questions. Could the prevalence of the APOC3 mutation itself be a byproduct of isolation? The Amish, descended from a relatively small group of European founders, have a tightly knit gene pool. Over generations, this has led to both challenges, like rare recessive disorders, and gifts such as this mutation. In a way, the APOC3 story isn't just about heart health. It's about how tradition, isolation, and routine have preserved something rare in the modern genetic landscape. Yet even among the 95% of Amish who do not carry the mutation, heart health remains strong. Their LDL cholesterol may be higher, but it's the dense, less harmful type. Their blood pressure remains stable deep into old age. Their inflammation markers stay low. The mutation may be a golden ticket for some, but the real safety net is behavior. The kind that's been passed down not through DNA, but through tools, recipes, and daily sweat. As the studies advanced, researchers stopped asking whether the Amish avoided a dangerous fruit and started asking something deeper. How does a culture shape biology? Not just through what it eats, but through what it expects of the body every day. The next chapter would test that very question. As attention turned back to the role of labor, fatigue, and the metabolic cost of a slowing lifestyle. Because even in Amish country, the rhythm was beginning to change. By the time researchers returned for follow-up in the spring of the third year, something had subtly shifted. The clatter of hammer on wood still rang across the pastures, and black buggies still moved along dirt roads. But in several communities, mechanization had quietly crept in. A new generation of Amish had begun adopting propane-powered tools, using compressed air systems for woodworking, and even taking jobs in non-Amish warehouses and metal shops. Though the cultural norms remained strict, no electricity, no vehicles, exceptions were growing, and with them, so were small but significant changes in daily exertion. Nowhere was this shift more visible than in the barns. Tasks once done with manual pitchforks and mule-drawn plows were increasingly handled by hydraulic tools or rented diesel tractors used under temporary allowances. These tools saved time, but they also reduced effort. In one household, researchers noted that the chore time between breakfast and lunch had dropped from 3 hours to just under 90 minutes, thanks to pneumatic feeders and automated watering systems. The labor savings were real, but so were the metabolic consequences. The same families who had previously recorded pristine glucose curves now showed subtle deviations. Post-meal blood sugars lingered longer. Heart rate variability dipped. Waistlines expanded, not drastically, but enough to warrant attention. One man, a 43-year-old carpenter with no history of weight gain, had gained 18 pounds over the past 14 months, despite eating the same breakfast of eggs, sausage, and homemade toast. What had changed? He'd traded his hand saw for an air-powered one and stopped walking the 2 miles to a job site, now riding in a shared buggy with neighbors. These small shifts in effort translated into metabolic inertia. The researchers, alarmed but intrigued, recalibrated their focus. The banana, once the central curiosity, was now a proxy for something far more important: energy mismatch. In the Amish system of old, food was in direct dialogue with labor. Every calorie consumed had a physical cost. But as mechanical efficiency increased, even marginally, that dialogue began to break. Calories no longer needed to be earned, and even traditional foods, dense, rich, and made from scratch, started to behave like liabilities in the absence of corresponding output. One elder summed it up during a porch interview. "We're still eating like our grandfathers, but working like our sons." It was a poignant diagnosis, and one that struck at the heart of a growing metabolic dilemma. The community's lifestyle had been its armor. Remove a few pieces, and the system no longer held. And it wasn't just physical. Fatigue began appearing in younger men, joint stiffness, shortness of breath, even pre-hypertension. Women reported more difficulty maintaining weight after childbirth. A small but rising number of children were flagged for borderline blood glucose at a local clinic operated by Mennonite volunteers. This wasn't a collapse. It was a quiet unraveling, and it mirrored what the modern world had experienced a century earlier, when industrialization reduced labor demands and calorie-rich foods became widespread. For the Amish, the process was slower, but it followed the same trajectory. Less motion, more convenience, subtle erosion. The researchers issued a cautious report. The Amish were not immune. Even their deeply rooted traditions could be reshaped by modern efficiency. If physical output dropped and dietary patterns remained constant, the heart protective system faltered. No gene, no prayer, and no food choice, not even the absence of bananas, could fix the fundamental imbalance between what went in and what came out. And so, the team posed a new hypothesis. Could the Amish preserve their cardiovascular edge in the face of modernization? Could effort be reintegrated intentionally? Through cultural reinforcement, community roles, or redesigned routines? The next study would test this very idea. Researchers plan to reintroduce traditional labor tasks in a controlled group and observe whether metabolic markers could be restored. If successful, the findings wouldn't just benefit the Amish. They might point the way for the rest of the world. Because if the breakdown was about effort, maybe the solution wasn't a pill or a banned food. Maybe it was movement, reclaimed, ritualized, and rebuilt.